The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one. Tonight we've got a great guest with us, and we have with us tonight Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And Tabby Cat Gash.
How you doing, everybody?
And Jeffrey Gould. Maybe.
Hello.
There
Can
he
you hear
is.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, how much of a lag is there? I said it right after I heard you're saying.
Oh, a little bit, you might say. So
great.
All right. Well, we done missed a few minutes, not many tonight, but we had problems getting connected. Wouldn't let me connect, but now we're on. Hopefully, there we go. We got it now. People in the chat room, yeah, people in the chat room can hear us. So, all right,
hit that tape button.
Oh, it's being taped.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm sure it is. I was taping to start with, so some of the beginning part beforehand I'll have to cut out, but it's being taped. So with that, though, we got a great guest lined up for tonight. And Jeff, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yes. Well, our guest is the founder of the group Paranormal Inc. Our returning guest is paranormal investigator, multiple book author, and filmmaker Rich Newman. So welcome back, Rich.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
No problem. Sorry about not being able to get on, but that happens ever so often. I don't know exactly what causes Centova not to connect, but sometimes it does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, but we're
haunted
on.
machine.
And like I was saying, the last time we had you on was 10/8/2016, so it's been a little while.
And it sounds like that was probably for my first book with Llewellyn.
Haunted Bridges. We were talking about Haunted Bridges.
That's the book we talked about.
Oh, okay,
yes.
Haunted Bridges. Okay.
Sure was. Yeah. A lot of haunted bridges around. I know you go through every state in this book and list different places and what they are, and then you talk about skirmishes, different battles, and you talk about frightening forts, where the dead lie, and historic spirits and structures, and antebellum haunts. Now, just right offhand, how many of these different places for your book did you actually go to?
Well, it sounds like you're talking about the Civil War book. So with that one, I probably went to about 75% of them.
Okay. And what about this new one here, Passport to the Paranormal?
That one I've been to probably more like 90%, because the way that book sort of came about was the very first book that I ever wrote for Llewellyn was called the Ghost Hunter's Field Guide. And it was this massive tome of over 1,100 haunted places, state by state. And when the anniversary sort of came up for that book, they were kind of deciding whether they wanted to do a second updated edition of it or something new. And I actually thought it was better, rather than just re-releasing that book with updated info, that I sort of whittle it down to about my 300 or so favorite haunted places all over the country and call it Passport to the Paranormal. And that also kind of gave me the opportunity to go in there and put some personal stories from some of those places when I was there, and kind of just, hone it down to the best stuff, of the last 10 years or so.
Right. Well, some of the places that you have in your book, I have been to. there's some others that I have been to that wasn't in the book, but they're no longer here. They've been shut down. So I can understand why they wasn't in your book.
Oh, sure. And there's places actually, and the reason that we, like I say, talked about doing an updated one of the Ghost Hunters Field Guide is because just like with the issue of your place, a lot of them go out of business. They're bed and breakfast, and then they end up selling out to a private family that moves in. And then a lot of times, too, they just change names.
Right.
There's a lot of, like, little, especially on the East Coast, there seems to be, like, a lot of flipping on the East Coast that you get a lot of B&Bs, you know, that'll have one name, and then 3 or 4 years later, it's totally changed to a different name. And also the culture changes. Like, one owner is totally cool with the ghost stories and folklore and stuff that happens there. And then the next owners come in and they fervently deny, you know, that anything's ever happened there, you know, and kind of poo-poo all that stuff.
Well, the very first investigation that I went on before I started doing this show was just around the corner from where we live at. It was the Sorg Opera House in Middletown, Ohio. That is now no longer there. I mean, the building is there, but it's not. They don't list it as being haunted and have it for investigations. It's now an opera house and plays. They do plays there, and they also do like weddings and stuff like that. So they don't have it set up that you can investigate.
That seems to happen a lot. Like, especially if they start getting a lot of negative experiences coming from people coming there and causing problems, or kids trying to break in or something because they want to see the spooky stuff. And so that's not an uncommon story, actually, and sadly.
Right.
Yeah. Sadly, that really is a very negative aspect of the paranormal field. And it's those few that go to these locations and they either cause damage or they're disrespectful to the owners or the spirits. And the next thing you know, all of the paranormal community gets a bad rap just for a handful of people that just don't know how to behave themselves. It's a shame.
It is, and it's also one of the reasons why I almost never put cemeteries in books, just because of how many people have gone to cemeteries, drinking and hanging out and causing problems and disrespecting the dead and the families who have dead there. And so I think the only book that I've actually put cemeteries in has been the Civil War book because of a few of the Confederate battle, burial grounds and things like that have some great stories. But they tend to be more like mini, like state-ran parks than your typical cemetery.
Yeah. Now, in your Civil War book, when you do mention some of the cemeteries, most of them, I think, are pretty much associated with battlefields. So they are very much protected by, the park services that run them or the municipalities where they're located. So it's fortunate that most of the people that go on to those places, they're watched pretty close, make sure that nothing like that happens.
Absolutely. And also, they don't really have recent interments. Most of the people who are buried there are from the 1800s. So that's another, kind of reason why that, you can worry a little bit less about, a family popping up and being angry that someone kicked over, their dead mother's tombstone.
Yeah. Still happens, though. I mean,
sure.
It really does still happen. I remember reading a few months back where somebody somewhere down south just decided to go into an old cemetery. There was a handful of newer ones, newer graves in there, but somebody had gone in there, a bunch of kids, and they knocked over some of the old gravestones. And fortunately, they caught up with some of them, and they hung them up by their Buster Browns and caused them to, either make restitution for the damages or out and out put them back. Total
Oh, sure.
disrespect. Total disrespect.
And some of them are really popular, like the cemetery at Chickamauga is a really popular, if not ghost hunting spot, for sure kind of urban legend spot, because people have heard stories of, the green-eyed specter or monster, whichever version of the story you want to go with, that's sort of seen in Chickamauga around that old cemetery. And that's, unfortunately, that one gets a lot of, wrong people visiting there.
Yeah. Well, now, are there any other cemeteries that you're aware of that have any other critters or creatures associated with it other than just ghosts? I mean, you refer to this green person or green being in Chickamauga. Any other cemeteries that have got any other critters besides spooks in there?
I can't think of one offhand that has to do with the Civil War, but we actually have one close to us here in Memphis, Tennessee, in a little town called Atoka, and it's called the Atoka Cemetery, but it's used to be listed in the local, like the television networks and stuff. They would do like an article every Halloween, area about what the 10 most haunted places around Memphis are, and it would always end up on those lists. And they have these bizarre stories where people go to this cemetery at night and see these giant black creatures that look almost like a cross between like a dog and a demon with eyes and these inhuman snarls and growls and things, and all types of different things. It's actually the more people that I've talked to that have gone there, and I actually had a really spooky experience there too, if you want to hear that. But
sure.
The more that I talk to people who go there, people are kind of convinced that this particular cemetery is kind of like a portal, kind of a haunting, where it's rather than actually being physical ghosts running around or anything or creatures, it's almost like you're just hearing and kind of viewing through to the other side.
Oh. Okay, so what happened to you?
We actually went out there to do an article back when Paranormal Inc., when we had our active website. We would post little articles around Halloween, too, about local spots. And we went out there, and it was just me and another guy. And we had permission to be in the cemetery, of course. You always get permission to go to these places, people, because I've seen that backfire so many times. But we had permission to be there. And we were kind of out there with our video cameras doing the typical ghost hunting thing. And a cop had actually pulled over a driver on the road adjacent to the cemetery. So we decided, even though we have permission to be here, I'd rather not spend 20 minutes explaining to the cop what we're doing. So let's just be quiet for a minute while the cop gives that ticket out. And while we were sitting there quiet, this bizarre, strange sound came from all around us. And it almost sounded like a generator ramping up. It kind of went like, and it just went to this ungodly loud roar sound. And me and the guy, his name was Mike, we looked at each other like, what the hell is this, And, of course, we were excited to go back and listen to the audio recorder, and it's not there.
Oh,
you can
wow.
hear us talking, you can hear us react to it, and you can even hear the cop, who is a good 75 feet away from us, giving out the ticket. But this giant sound that filled both of our ears to the point that it sounded like a monster was around us is not on the audio at all.
Wow. What do you think would cause that where the audio wouldn't have picked it up?
I think it kind of supports that idea of the portal, because I think there's a little bit to be said about sometimes when we see or hear ghostly things, or we'll just say paranormal things, it does seem to be sort of psychically connected rather than physically connected to us. That's why I think sometimes you have someone who'll see a full-bodied apparition and literally two other people looking in the same spot don't see anything. It's almost more like a psychic impression or something. But it was strange. It was nice to have another guy sitting on the tailgate right beside me with his video camera in his hand too. And we both, kind of looked at each other with those wide eyes like, what the heck is this sound, So it would have been weird if only one of us had heard it.
Yeah. Validation is the best. Validation.
Wow. So, why do you think there are so many hotels and inns around the country that have activity or ghosts?
Well, I mean, I always say that the best ghost stories are always attached to great history. And I don't think that a lot of serious ghost hunters out there can be serious ghost hunters unless they also have kind of a love of history and stories about history. They kind of just go hand in hand. And old hotels, historic hotels, have so much history in them. I mean, we think now of all the people who go to, say, hotels to consummate their weddings. They go to hotels to celebrate big events in their life. They go to hotels to commit suicide when they're in despair. These things have been happening at hotels since day one. I mean, you go back to the oldest stories of the coolest Old West boarding house, and there's suicide stories, murders, people mad gambling, the women or guys cheating on each other and having fights, and just all that kind of like high energy history is all trapped in these old hotels. And I just think that when you have that much history in a place, it's going to come out.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think it's the same way with theaters. There's so much energy that goes through theaters, especially older ones. Whether they started out in the 1800s or if they were just vaudeville theaters that started out in the 20s or something. The emotions and the energy, not only from the actors and the singers and the orchestra, but the people that come to see it, and it stays there. And you can, for some of us, we can actually physically feel it when we go into these places. It doesn't really leave.
That's true. And I also think that theaters are a lot of times, especially during some of the harder moments in our country's history, are moments when people could get away and have some fun and enjoy life. And, in the afterlife, they kind of want to go back to that kind of thing. We have a fantastic theater here in town that's haunted called the Orpheum. I don't know if you've heard of the Orpheum Theater in Memphis, but it's this fantastic circa 1800s hotel. I mean, it's been rebuilt a few times over the years because of fires and whatnot. But it has this great story of a ghost girl named Mary, and she's so popular that she has her own seat in the theater that they don't allow anyone else to sit in.
Oh.
So no matter what the show is, no matter how big the performer, that seat will be empty for Mary.
Oh, that's nice. That's great.
I have seen that on people's shows, and I can't remember if the Ghost Hunters did it or one of those groups did that theater, and they was talking about that.
Yeah, it's a really popular place for, especially the I actually used to appear on shows for like Discovery and Travel Channel. When they would come to the Orpheum, they would call me and say, "Hey, you want to come out and talk to the ghost people for us?" And we'd be like, "Okay."
Oh,
that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Is there any one particular either hotel or bed and breakfast that you have gone to that has really made an impression on you, or if you've had a really fantastic experience with?
Oh man, so many. I have to say, like, for the last 3.5 years before, we're talking world before COVID here, I was working with Fuji TV from Japan, and they have a show called Nandakor Mystery that they travel to weird, haunted, spooky, paranormal spots all over the world, and then they feature them on this show in Japan. And I worked with those guys mostly in the States. We did, I think, something like 30 episodes or so here in the States. And then I went to Ireland and England with them too for a couple spots.
Wow.
And working with those guys, we've gone to some fantastic places, where we've gotten some great, experiences. And here close to me, probably our two most popular close by haunts would be the Crescent Hotel in Arkansas, which is about an hour and a half from me.
I've heard of that one.
And in my hometown of St. Louis is the Limp Mansion that I've been to many times as well. That has a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
I worked on a feature film out in Nixa, Missouri a few years ago, and the director, long in advance, had orally promised to let me go to the Crescent Inn, but he kind of reneged and conveniently forgot all about that promise once I was there.
Oh, man, you better go after him. He owes you a good trip.
And do you know Tim Pilland?
I do not.
I was under the impression he either worked there or he was very much he was somebody who was like a liaison or something regarding investigation.
Oh, he could be.
It might be.
I meet so many of these people. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I travel so much that sometimes it's really hard for me to remember names and things. I remember there was a fella there, and he was one of the guys that was, on the episode of Ghost Hunters when they went to the Crescent Hotel. He does like the tours, like if you go there and you take the ghost tours and stuff. And he's kind of like the popular guy there in Eureka Springs who knows about all the local folklore and the stories of the Crescent and all that kind of stuff. But I've been fortunate enough that I live close enough to the Crescent that I've gotten to stay in all the great rooms there, stay in the, they call it Michael's room. It's where a ghost, apparently while they were building the hotel, he fell about 4 stories to his death.
Yeah.
And he haunts this particular room where he landed. And then there's another room that they call Theodora's room that's known for a nurse named Theodora who worked and lived at the hotel when it was actually a fraudulent hospital for treating people with cancer. And it was actually a grifter named Doc Baker who pretended he had cures for cancers using the local spring water. And people would come there and pay, just thousands of dollars, which was a lot back then, to get well and would end up dying. And they would sneak their bodies out during the night and tell everyone else, oh, they got better and they left, And, yeah.
And we don't need any
got caught
about that.
What's that?
We don't need to actually meet them and have validation or anything. No, yeah.
Exactly. Well, they ended up actually getting him for mail fraud. They could, they could never quite pin him for the fake cancer stuff, but because he was promoting fake cures in the water through the mail, they indicted him with mail fraud and hauled him off to Kansas City and threw him in prison.
Oh.
Jeez, no different than
did he at least go to a haunted prison?
I don't know. It would be worth seeing, though.
Have you ever been to the Stanley Hotel?
I did. I got to stay in 217. I did. It was a great night too. It was. I went there with the Japanese crew for Fuji TV, of course, because that's any of these hauntings that are sort of known all over the world in America are the ones that they always want to go to. So that was really great that I got to tag out with them. So we did the Stanley and Queen Mary and Lizzie Borden, and if it's a big one that you probably just know the name of, we've probably been there. And at Stanley Hotel, I got to stay in room 217, but we were up about most of the night working on the show, which has a bizarre format, by the way, to show you the difference between American TV and Japanese TV. On their ghost show, what they do is they bring in a sort of up-and-coming actor or comedian from Japan, and they lie to them and say, hey, you're coming to, Colorado to do this beer festival. We're going to use you as the spokesman at this beer festival. And so they bring them all the way there. They stick them in a haunted room, and then we monitor and watch them from another room, and hilarity ensues.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
Oh, Lord. Oh, I'm sure that would be hilarious for some, but not for the person that's in there.
Well, now, if they're coming from Japan, do they speak English, or they the guests that they bring over only speak Japanese?
Well, they usually only speak Japanese.
Well, I
and
wonder
it's pretty funny because the company that I actually work for is called GPUSA and they're from LA, and they're sort of the American liaison company for Fuji TV. So the director and the talent, we'll call them, come from Japan, but everyone that's in the crew other than the director comes from LA, and they're usually Japanese Americans, and they speak Japanese and English.
Wow. So I wonder if the one staying in the room hears something in Japanese, or they're talking to him in English.
Well, I guess it depends on the ghost, because we're talking about American ghosts, so they're probably hearing them in English. But I don't know that any of them have ever actually heard words that they recognize. But I've definitely seen some terrified people in these rooms.
Wow.
But I can tell you an interesting thing about room 217 at the Stanley, if you want to hear it.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so are you aware of the story about Stephen King there?
Yeah.
I know Stephen King was there. I don't know if I remember the story.
Well, that's how we got The Shining.
Well, that's right. The Shining. According to King himself, he went there in the winter in the 70s, and there was somebody staying in the hotel. And him and Tabitha, his wife, were put into room 217, and he had a terrifying personal experience that he's never told anyone what it was, but it inspired him to write The Shining. So when I went there, we had been working for most of the night watching the fella, we'll call him the sucker, sleeping in the other room, who was experiencing spooky stuff himself. So by the time I got to room 217, it was about 1 a.m. And I pretty much killed everything and just crawled into bed and went to sleep. And I think I'd probably been asleep about 20 minutes, and I was startled awake, and I heard a female laughing. And as soon as my brain registered what I was hearing, and I snapped awake, it went away. So I said, okay. And so I went back to sleep. And then about 2 hours later, we're hitting about 3:30 now, I wake up again, and this time the laughing kind of kept going, and I noticed that my bathroom light was on. So I get up out of the bed, and I cross the room, and of course you know what's going through my head from The Shining.
Yeah.
The infamous bathroom and the woman in the tub.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, if I open this door and I see what was in The Shining in that tub, I am out of here, man. But I open up the door, and something has taken my toothbrush and thrown it in the floor.
Wow.
That was about kind of anticlimactic. So I put my toothbrush back, turn the light off, go back to bed. But that was kind of, but that did get me thinking, like, did Stephen King wake up and hear, a female spirit or something coming from the bathroom, and then he went in there and he did see something? I didn't, but maybe he did, and I could see how that would make The Shining.
Well, maybe perhaps his wife didn't like the fact that she thought there was another female in the room and said, all right, let's get out of here.
Could be.
I'd probably be doing that if something ever happened to me in one of them places.
Oh, no, you wouldn't, Henry. You'd be sitting there saying, all right, who in the hell's in the bathroom messing with my stuff? I think it would be cool to go visit there. That was one of the things on a list of places that I really wanted to go to. And, maybe one of these days, when things settle down and there aren't fires trying to burn everything down out there, I'll get out there and maybe, hopefully, stay in that room. And if she laughs at me, I'll ask her what the joke was.
Wow.
Well, that's a great place to go, mainly if for the reason that they really embrace the stories about the place and the haunting there, and they really make you feel welcome about it, and honestly, The Shining saved that hotel, because when King stayed there, it was this dilapidated, outdated, falling apart kind of place. And then after The Shining came out, and he told everyone that he got the idea while staying there, the Stanley became this instant mecca for horror fans, ghost hunters, you name it, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, now,
I guess that's good PR.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's, and that's always been kind of, working on these books over the years has been kind of interesting, is the amount of places that are willing to go with that PR versus when I first started. Whereas, a lot of people were still kind of poo-pooing ghost stories and not really encouraging, that side of their history. And now, thanks to, paranormal television everywhere, books, people like me writing books and things everywhere, so many more of them are willing to not only tell you their ghost stories, but they publish it on their websites and sell merch and all kinds of stuff,
Yeah. In many ways, it's, to me personally, there's an awful lot of places that do benefit from having, advertised that the place is haunted, and, having people to come in, and, a lot of times the spirits are, pretty willing to talk or whatever. Then you have some other smaller places that I've noticed over the years. You go in, I went to them years ago, and the activity was pretty heavy duty, and I've gone back to visit maybe 10 years later, and the feeling there is much, and I can't help but that's because the amount of people that come into these places, they bring in a different kind of energy, good or bad or indifferent. They bring in a different energy, and it has a tendency to change the atmosphere. Have you noticed that? Have you gone back to revisit someplace?
I've definitely gone back and revisited places. And because of, let's say the first time you go there, like you said, like it wasn't really a popular place, or most people didn't know the ghost stories. So it was sort of easy to kind of do like a ghost hunt on the down low, hit the hallways after midnight when everyone's asleep, and head down and, get some video and do some EVP work and that kind of thing. But now, since everyone kind of knows this stuff, it's hard to get those moments because, like I go to the Limp Mansion now, I won't go near that place on a Friday or Saturday night if I want to go ghost hunting, because I know there's going to be 10 or 15 people there up at 3 a.m. with like a Ouija board drinking, saying, hey, ghosts, come do something, and just pretty much ruining the ghost hunting vibe of the place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I know I don't like to go to these places to do investigations with the big group and pay a lot of money. I cannot do that. If I can go, I go because I'm either doing a show at the place and it doesn't cost me anything then, or I only go with a small amount of people that investigate with me, and that's it. I can't go for these big groups, because when you try to do something, you're hearing talking everywhere. You're hearing them play their little that things, and just you never can get anything. So I keep away from stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, I've done events that are based around, like, say, like a ghost hunting class or something, where, like, I'm teaching a class to a bunch of people who just want to learn, like, the basics kind of situation, and then they get kind of a ghost tour kind of a thing.
Right.
I'm cool with, like, that stuff, because that tends to pop up a lot around here around Halloween.
Right.
But as far as seriously ghost hunting, I don't like to honestly ghost hunt with anyone more than one, maybe two other people.
Yeah.
And, I really don't want to be around. I want to know 100% when I get an EVP that it's an EVP.
Right.
That it wasn't,
Definitely.
some other guy or girl in the group, who was down there complaining that they need to go to the bathroom or something, know.
Well, I know that a lot of times when I've got my audio running, I'll be asking questions. I never hear anything till I go back and listen. And you'd be surprised at the stuff that I actually capture from the questions and stuff like that I asked. I know I did a little house one time where a friend of mine that I was working with said, you got to come to our house because it's haunted and this and that. And I got our group together and we went. Well, now, I usually have a couple investigators and at least one medium. And me and one other guy and a medium was sitting in this house and looking down the hallway to the back door and asking questions. And there's supposed to have been a little girl in the house. And I'm trying to get her to come and talk with us. And about 10, 15 minutes into it, the medium says, she's standing right in front of you. So I'm getting my camera. I'm going to try and take a picture. And Mark asks, honey, can Henry take your picture? Of course, you never heard anything, but on the recorder it says, I'm smiling.
Oh.
You can't beat stuff like that. And you don't know that they're there or saying anything until you go back and listen to the audio because you never hear anything.
That's right. And I also tell people, when you go to a place, that has stories about it like this, just turn your audio recorder on immediately.
Right.
I mean, don't wait for the ghost hunt.
Nope.
Even when you go in, you meet everyone, and they're walking you around and showing you around. Let that audio recorder run in your hand. You got a phone.
Right there.
Turn on the audio recorder and let it run.
Yep.
You'll be surprised what you get.
Sure do.
Yeah, you mentioned you've been on the Queen Mary, you said, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the best and so far only EVP I've ever gotten was on the Queen Mary.
Oh, okay.
Where was that?
That was down in the first class pool area where you've got little girl Jackie and adult Sarah and sort of a grumpy male spirit
Jeff, you're breaking up.
hanging out. And yeah, I posted it on YouTube. Yeah, I always break. I say more than 3 words.
Yes. And Kat's been breaking up.
I'll send you the link, Rich, to the EVP. I'll post a link on the report page as well.
Cool.
Where the YouTube.
I had a pretty decent experience at the Queen Mary too. We were I can't think of his proper terms, and I don't want to mess it up, but he's like the pretend bosun of the ship, but he's kind of like I guess he worked, because it's a hotel. The Queen Mary is basically a hotel now. And he's sort of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Who's the guy at a hotel that always, tells you where the good restaurants are and gets things for
concierge?
you?
Concierge?
Yeah, concierge. He's like a concierge of the Queen Mary, but he has like a name, because he wears like a captain's looking outfit, and it's like he's the bosun or something. I don't remember exactly, but he was taking us, and I say us, me and a couple of guys from the Japanese crew, around the ship and telling us the stories. And we go down into the underneath the guts of the ship, where all the engines and all that stuff is.
Right.
And he's taking us through and talking about this really heavy door down there that was supposedly crushed someone.
Right.
Door 13.
Yeah, that was supposed to have crushed someone. And he's telling us about it. And as he's telling us the story, and we're running the camera filming him, the temperature drops 20 degrees.
Wow.
I mean, it felt like someone opened up an icebox behind us.
Wow.
And and I have to tell you, every single time that something spooky happens while shooting with the Japanese folks, they get really frightened quickly. They take ghosts very seriously. And as soon as anything starts happening, they will instantly kind of go pale and their eyes will get really wide, and they kind of start looking as a way to leave. And as soon as the code hit us, the director kind of looked at me with wide eyes, and the camera guy, and then we hear somebody. It sounds like footsteps of someone running straight at us. You can hear this doop 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 doop, and then it was gone. And it was just like someone had just like charged us while we were standing there.
Wow. Now, could you hear that, or you only caught it on the recorder?
No, it was audio. We could hear it live.
Wow.
It was in real time.
Wow.
I mean, he was literally telling us about the door and the stories about the door, and I guess the Queen Mary had been used to transport troops at the end of the war or something like that, of World War II.
He was telling us the Grey Ghost.
Yeah, and he was telling us the stories of that, and then, like I said, all of a sudden the cold hit us, and then no sooner do we start looking at each other and like, do you feel that? And then here comes this toom, 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 of something just like running at us.
Wow.
Well, taking into account it was World War II, and the ghost of the ship crew member suddenly saw Japanese people on board his ship.
Oh dear.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that could be a trigger of the whole thing. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Trigger object.
Yeah, they had painted, when they were doing troop transports, they painted the ship gray, which is why they called it the Grey Ghost.
That's right, yeah.
Wow. Now, I know, Barbara, you live in San Francisco, and she's been on the aircraft carrier. A couple times, right?
Oh, a lot more than a couple.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was this Hornet. Yeah.
Which
yeah,
one?
The Hornet.
Okay.
Yeah. The only EVP I was ever to catch there was one that said, "Can you hear me?"
Wow.
And that was from the birthings.
Was you on like a tour or?
No. You can go on the ship and just walk around.
And that's what.
And if you go in the weekdays, there's nobody there, so you can pretty much do your own ghost hunt.
Wow.
They don't stop you. So.
Well, that would be interesting. I know the Hornet was in a few battles, and it got tore up a little bit, didn't it?
I believe so. It was also transporting prisoners of war. And, of course, it also picked up the very first Apollo mission. So.
Right. The capsule. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Lots of stuff happening on there. A couple of fires, I think.
Wow. I suppose it's decommissioned now and just used for tours.
It's a museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
LA or San Francisco? Where?
In Alameda.
It's in Alameda.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very far away from San Francisco, right?
Cat, you're breaking up.
I have no idea. Alameda, yeah, there's a naval station.
And Jeff, you're breaking up.
Always.
I know it's not my computer, people, so.
But
there's something about water.
We're going to actually have to exercise this one.
There's something about water that I think carries a lot of energy that keeps some of these ships haunted for a very long time.
Yeah.
It could be. That's one of those theories, where they talk about certain types of rock formations associated around areas of water being sort of like a conduit for trapping, especially a lot of residual type things. So you could be correct on that, for sure.
Wow.
Have you ever had any experiences with aircraft, Rich?
No. I think that's probably one of the few kind of places I've been to that I haven't had something crazy happen. And I don't even know that I've actually investigated any kind of aircraft. I actually just went to the USS Alabama and the USS Drum about 2 weeks ago in Mobile, Alabama.
Right.
And stayed at a really cool haunted little B&B there. And they had planes there, like all over the grounds. And when I was talking to one of the park, he's not a ranger, but I guess just workers, he was telling me that there was a figure that was like kind of like a shadow person, like an all-black figure that's often seen standing next to one of the outdoor B-52 bombers that was used pretty heavily during World War II and even part of the Korean War. And he was saying that sometimes they get, 3 or 4 people in one day who say they see this all-black figure just standing next to the underneath the prop near the front wheels of this B-52.
Wow.
But I don't know that I've ever actually heard of any plane with a story on there. I mean, do you guys know a story like this?
Not from aircraft.
No, not really. I mean, the only aircraft story that I've ever heard about, mainly just around the hangars more than anything else, not necessarily the planes, but the hangars. But I was just curious about airplanes because, there have been stories over the years, like probably the most popular is the ghost of Flight 401, where after that aircraft crashed, they took parts, bits and pieces of parts out of the wreckage and put them in other aircraft, L-1011 aircraft, and people were seeing ghosts of the crew on those aircraft. And they finally made the correlation that all of these aircraft that they were seeing these ghosts on these aircraft, they had salvaged parts from 401. And so they started yanking them out of there. And once they took all these parts out of there, the hauntings stopped. But I'm sure that there's probably aircraft, since there are so few aircraft that are left anymore, like from the major wars, World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam, that are still in existence, with the exception of that, what is that big, huge graveyard out west that's got 10 million junk planes out there in the desert or something? I'm sure that if people were to go out there at night, because they're not allowed, I'm sure there's got to be a lot of ghosts from people that died on board those aircraft. So you might want to go out there one day, Rich, and see if that shadow person really does exist. That would be a cool thing to hear you talk about next time.
Well, that's definitely my kind of trip. And I'll tell you, if I ever heard about a haunted World War I biplane, I'd be all over that thing. I'd probably take a ride in it.
World War I aircraft to fly in. I've been in one in Virginia, and they strapped an old World War II parachute to my butt, which was heavier than I was, and stuck me in the cockpit. And I was strapped in to the point where if I wanted to get out, I don't think I could have. And the last words that were said to me before we took off was, in the event that you find yourself outside of the aircraft for some reason, reach under your left armpit and pull that ring. And I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to get out of the aircraft the way you've got me strapped in? But
you're saying that's not an event. That's a horror story.
But I mean, that was the last thing that was said to me. And I was thinking, well, how am I supposed to get out with me strapped in with like 6 seat belts? But we did loops and rolls and hammerhead stalls and everything, and it was a birthday gift from my mom's boyfriend. And when I got back down on the ground, she came running over to me and hugged me, and she says, "Oh, I didn't think I was ever going to see you again." And I said, "Well, let's put it this way. We had crashed. At least I was doing something that I was enjoying." That was a lot of fun. That really was.
So, Jeff, you still with us, or did you get bumped off?
Yeah, probably. If I can say more than 7 words without it cutting me up.
Yeah, like I was saying, I tend to get better EVPs and things that happen if I'm just in a small group. I don't like going, and I've been to Waverly 4 or 5 times with Para-X Radio, and I would get to go there for free with them to do my show, but I would also get to go in there to investigate. That is one huge spooky building.
Oh yeah, I've been to Waverly a couple times. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those places that unfortunately it's hard to avoid a crowd there.
Yes,
like
that's
I mean, especially if you go for any of their official like tour times or any of that kind of stuff, you know, you're going to be there with a group of 10 to 20
at least.
And
yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's I just when I see a group like that, then I just something in my brain just goes, okay, this is not a serious investigation thing. This is just a let's have fun, take a tour, hear the stories, experience it. Maybe we'll get something great on a great photo,
right?
Or a great video clip or something, and just kind of concentrate. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I mean, if I know there's going to be a lot of pollution going on, and I don't even like to be around people with those, with their broken radios doing the radio thing.
Yes.
And yeah, it drives me crazy.
They got an old school not far from me called Post Town. It's in Middletown, Ohio. And matter of fact, they've got an event, I think it's this month sometime. And you can go set your table up and, people comes in, autographs or whatever. You can talk about your show and things like that. But generally, later on after the event, if you want to stay, they have ghost hunts of the building. It's supposed to be pretty haunted, but I don't, because I leave before it gets dark. I have to drive home, and I can't see good at night, so I usually come back home. So, but I've been there, I don't know, 4 or 5 times to do the show and just go for setting up for the event and stuff like that. But it's supposed to be haunted, and they tell you the different ghosts and where they're at and stuff like that. I tend to find, though, that you don't get very much if you're with a bunch of people trying to go out and do stuff. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, when we used to do the ghost hunting classes, we would always talk about ghost hunting kind of using an acronym called DICE that I wrote about in the Ghost Hunting for Beginners book that I did for Llewellyn. But it basically comes down to DICE stands for detect, interact, capture, and escalate. And it basically, if you're going to interact with a ghost and kind of get that energy flowing between you, that's kind of the goal you want. You want to kind of start interacting with a ghost. And usually when you can get that going and you can get them talking to you, whether it's EVP or just their disembodied voice and you're hearing it in real time, or maybe they're moving something for you or knocking on the wall or opening a door, whatever, you get that energy going and it can escalate. It's going to get better and better and better. And nothing kills that bit of interaction and that escalation more than, some jackass walking in and going, "Hey, y'all got some beer?" Because they, it was other people from a group in the tour with you.
Right.
So many times you do these public events, and people, and I don't fault them for wanting to have a good time, but I can't take those kinds of ghost hunts very seriously. I mean, when everyone's walking around with coolers of beer and everyone's in groups of 4 and 5 and they're, hanging out and talking, and they're talking to each other so much, they never hear a disembodied voice anyway. They're too busy talking themselves.
That's it.
So, yeah, I'm not that guy that's going to poo-poo that kind of event or anything. but something in my brain just automatically goes, okay, this is not me getting to ghost hunt. This is just everyone wanting to have a good time, so I'll just do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. All right, I think we're going to take us a quick break. I know we missed a few minutes at the start of the show, but we're going to go ahead and take our break, and then be about 6-7 minutes, something like that. Remember, your mic will be live, and I'm going to let Jeff. You still with us?
Yep.
Okay. You want to take us out for a quick break?
Exactly. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, Tabby Cat Gash, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with our guest author and filmmaker, Rich Newman. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Para-X Radio, programming for the open mind.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we got Tabby Cat Gash.
Hi, everybody.
And Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
All right. And we want to welcome back our guest tonight. Who is our guest, Jeff?
Still Rich Newman.
Still? Oh.
By the way, Rich,
It's still me.
what was the name of the TV show, Magical something?
The Japanese one?
What was the title again?
The Japanese show is called Nandacore Mystery.
Mystery. Okay.
Is that Manticore like the mythical beast?
No, Nandacore, like Nandakore.
That would have made
Ah, okay. That's why we couldn't find it. I was looking up the mythical beast, the Manticore.
Yeah.
My bad. My bad.
I heard too.
I want to remind everybody in the chat room, if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat, Tabby Cat, or myself, Henry Foister, and we will get those right over to our guest. I know there's a lot of places that I have done that has closed. One is being, and I forget what the name of it was. It was an old folks home, and we went there, and we was down in the day room just talking, Kat and I, and we never heard anything. But the recorder, when we go back and listen to it, picks up a little girl, and she says, "Please wake up." We have no idea if someone had died or somebody was sleeping and she wanted to go home. Just, please wake up. And that was all we caught. But
Yeah, and that's a pretty typical EVP story. I mean, you know, people, you try to learn as much as you can about a location before you go there and do an investigation and EVP work, so you sort of ask pertinent questions. But a lot of times, you know, because we don't hear answers coming back to us, you know, we don't get that real-time feedback. We're kind of feeling around in the dark, you know, and we get those unexpected kind of answers, you know.
right. And it was a great place. It closed a few years back. It was a very small town, just off the interstate. And I guess it had been closed. When the people closed it, they packed up, walked out, left everything. All the records, all the equipment, everything was right there in the building. They just left it. So,
Wow.
shame. The people was trying to get it going as investigations and stuff. Wasn't doing the greatest. I mean, they was doing some business, but it wasn't enough to actually pay for it and keep it going. So they ended up selling.
And it's kind of hard for a old folks home to capitalize on a haunted reputation.
Right.
You know, not like a hotel or a restaurant or a living museum or something that can sort of do tours and such, it's kind of more difficult in that particular situation. But I've definitely seen, my fair share of places closed down. One of my favorite B&Bs of all time was here in Tennessee, called Magnolia Manor in Bolivar, Tennessee. And it was just this great antebellum home turned into a B&B, super active. We used to do Halloween events there every year. We used to have just great investigation. I even featured it. I shot a documentary called Ghosts of War, where we went to haunted places associated with the Civil War. This was prior to writing the book, Ghosts of the Civil War. And this was just one of my favorite places. And unfortunately, the owner of the house, B&B, she got Alzheimer's, and her family struggled with that for a while, and they ended up having to sell the property, and it's no longer a B&B. So
Yeah.
I've seen that kind of stuff happen a lot.
Wow. Now, I have been up on one of the hills back behind Little Round Top, and they had one of them towers up on top of the hill up there that you could climb up, and there wasn't no way I was going to be climbing no stairs like that.
You're talking about Culp's Hill.
Right, Culp's Hill. And I was there to the edge of the top, kind of, looking down through the wood line. And all of a sudden I hear this zing through the trees, and I caught this voice said, "Get down." I mean, it wasn't, it was caught on the recorder. And I thought that was pretty interesting because there wasn't anybody there, and it picked up a voice like they was telling you, they're shooting at you, get down.
Well, I mean, and that's cool, man. I'm glad you got that. That's actually not too uncommon. I mean, when you start talking about battlefields, especially stuff like Gettysburg, usually your typical stories are audio events. People hear the sounds of gunfire, like the shouts of battle, maybe even like the crying of the wounded or the moans of the wounded kind of thing.
Right.
Or voices like doing battle, things like you heard,
Right.
and happening around them. Those are usually the stories you get from battlefields, these sort of residual sounds that would have probably been happening, during the war. Whereas, I'm supposed to go to Gettysburg, at some point this fall, actually. And I love that area. My favorite battlefield spot, though, in the country for sure, and it's definitely, I've gotten some very dark EVPs there, is where the Battles of Stones River here in Tennessee is,
Right.
outside of Nashville.
Right.
They have an absolutely horrific spot there, where troops got caught in this gully. And then they thought, this is kind of clever. We'll stay in this gully and they'll never see us up on top as we kind of circle around. And what happened was, it was like, honestly, like shooting the fish in the pond kind of story.
Right.
The other side jumped up around them and just lit them up. And they were down in this hole, and something like, I don't want to get this number wrong, but it was definitely thousands died in this little ravine. And you go see it in person, you're thinking to yourself, 1,000+ people died in this hole,
Wow.
like right here. And people just get, crazy stuff there. You get the definite battlefield sounds and the moans of pain and anger and the battle cries and all that. But they also get these sort of dark entities that a lot of people, especially up there, I know several paranormal groups up around Franklin, Tennessee, who say that they believe that these are actually non-human entities that are sort of feeding off of the sheer amount of death that kind of happened in that area. And they capture these really dark figures around that area, and these strange, almost hellish kind of sounds on audio and things like that.
Wow.
I just looked that up. That happened right after Christmas and all the way through New Year's. Yeah, that's a heck of a holiday for those people. I wouldn't have thought that at that period of time they would have been doing a whole lot of fighting, because it had to have been pretty damn cold.
Yeah.
So, and it's also something like 23,000 casualties at Stone River. Wow.
And it's one of those that people don't talk about. You know what I mean? Because everyone kind of knows, the Gettysburg and Shiloh and some, the bigger battlefields. And Battle of Stones River, like you mentioned, was, close to the holidays. It had a lot of casualties. There's just a lot of interesting stories about that particular battle. And when you tour Franklin, Tennessee, there's a pair of really cool living museum haunted houses there too. One called the Carter House and one called Carnton Mansion. And man, they're just, you want to talk about, when you walk in a place and you just feel the history, like you feel like you're stepping back in time like that. I mean, you feel that there,
Well, it's been a long time since I've been down in that area. I'm going to have to try and visit that area because I've been to a number of battlefields, mostly up around where I am in Maryland. But Stones River sounds like it's probably between that and what the other one was. What was the other one that was down there in that same area? Was it Shiloh in that?
Well, yeah, Shiloh is south of there. That's down here. Shiloh's close to me. It's right down here in Middle Tennessee, outside Memphis.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that's a pretty interesting battle too. And the house I was just talking about a minute ago, that was a B&B called Magnolia Manor, had a historical spot in that story because prior to the Battle of Shiloh, the three major Northern generals of the time that ended up in Shiloh, which was Grant, Sherman, and I think McPherson. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ended up coming to Magnolia Manor, and even though the man who actually lived there, he was deployed to war with the Confederate Army, but his wife was there with her children, and she still hosted them and treated them like gentlemen and allowed them to stay there while they basically plotted the Battle of Shiloh. And infamously, while they were talking at the table, the woman of the house came down and was waiting on them. And General Sherman said the statement, "I believe that all Southern men should be just exterminated at birth."
Wow.
Ouch.
Yeah.
And she got really upset because her husband and her oldest son were in the Confederate Army at the time. And Grant told Sherman, "You're going to apologize to her for that," and made him stand up and apologize to her. And Sherman was so angry that he was forced to apologize to this woman that as he went upstairs to his room, he slammed his saber into the banister of the staircase and left it there. And even to this day, if you tour Magnolia Manor, that cut is still in the handrail of the stairs.
Wow.
where Sherman slammed his sword.
Wow.
Oh, what a jerk. Oh, well, that's a mild term. Sorry. Shiloh, for a lot of us Northerners, we always refer to it as Pittsburgh Landing. So instead of the Battle of Shiloh, if anybody wants to know, that was called Pittsburgh Landing. I wonder why it is that the Northern people had a tendency to name battles after areas, and the Southerners had a tendency to name it something else. It's like the Battle of Sharpsburg and the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Shiloh, and Pittsburgh Landing. That's an interesting way of putting it. So when you go to these places to investigate, I find it interesting that unless you try to relate to the spirits that are there by talking in a manner in which they can understand, in other words, using terms, names, and so forth that they would understand, you could go down to a battlefield such as Shiloh and refer to it as Pittsburgh Landing, and any Confederate soldier is going to look at you like you've got two heads. And they might not even
Right.
relate to you. They might not even talk to you. You've got to talk to a spirit in a manner in which they can understand you, something they can relate to. Whether, a trigger object can also just be how you talk to them. If you, like when I go on a battlefield, especially from a long time ago, because photography was still in its infancy, they had a tendency to refer to it as taking your image, not taking your photograph, but taking an image of you. So sometimes what I'll do is ask, if I really get the impression that there's someone there, I will ask them politely, do you mind if I take your image? And so it tickles me to listen to some of these people that are on these ghost hunts where they advertise them, and they're talking in modern day form about things that a ghost from the 1860s probably wouldn't know anything about. Like they wouldn't know what a flashlight is. They know what an oil lamp is. They know what a candle is. But they wouldn't know what a flashlight was. Flashlights weren't invented until the late 1890s, early 1900s. So you've got to use the vernacular and the things that they're familiar with. It's like going into a location that they don't even speak English and expecting the spirits to understand you. That tickles me.
All I can figure is maybe the argument is because if they're an intelligent ghost and they've been hanging out for 200 years, that they've paid attention to these changes around the house and heard everyone else kind of talking about it or something. But, I mean, I see exactly what you're saying, though. And I think that sometimes kind of falling back into a vernacular and even acting in a way that was sort of related to when they were alive is a really good way to get in some interaction going with a spirit. Are you guys familiar at all with the term of Singapore theory?
Yes, I am.
No.
Yep.
Right. So, Singapore theory is the idea of sort of introducing something to the atmosphere that is indicative of the period in which the ghost would have lived. And usually this is done with music. And I have found that this works really well at antebellum homes and things associated with the Civil War, where we would actually, in my phone, I actually have a sort of greatest hits of the Civil War kind of thing. And it's all this kind of bluegrass music. And we would just kind of put it on, and it's going to render your EVPs useless. So before you start thinking about that, the music's going to mess up your EVPs. But when you play the music, you can feel almost like the atmosphere will kind of get charged, like they're hearing music from their day, and it just sort of gets them going and interacting with you.
Uh-huh.
Wow, hadn't thought of that. Now there's
Go ahead,
sorry,
Henry. There was a time I was at a Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. And I had, because the place has a history dating back just prior to the Civil War, there was, many patients, and there were also residents of on the fourth floor that dated, way up until the 70s. So what I did was record music from the different eras. And as I was going along, I was playing different music, trying to get a reaction. And I finally got, I did get a couple of interesting EVPs, but the best interaction that I got using that type of technique was that I was playing music by Elvis Presley on the fourth floor where the residences were, and whoever it was did not like Elvis, because they slammed the door on me. It was like, no, I want you out. So in order to try and make sure that it wasn't the wind or somebody else or whatever, I walked back in there and I said, okay, well, I'm going to play this again, and if you don't like it, let me know. Well, I had no sooner played it and started to walk away than bam, the door slams again. So, okay, you didn't like Elvis Presley. Sorry about that.
Now there's a.
That'd be a crime in Memphis.
Oh yeah.
Or I was playing. I think it was. I was playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I was playing it at a bed and breakfast in Erie, Pennsylvania. And this particular bed and breakfast was notorious for having a lot of Confederate people that came up there after the war. And one in particular would come into the inn and stay at the bar quite often. And he was a roughhouser and caused a lot of problems. And eventually he got murdered somewhere in the town. And it was said that he comes back every now and then. Well, I happened to have my recorder on, and I was playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and I felt the scrape across my neck, and it burned. And I asked the person next to me to shine their flashlight on my throat, and here there was a thin red line across my throat. And I realized, okay, this person just did not like the fact that I was playing a Union song. Needless to say, I didn't play it anymore that night.
There's a place that I have always wanted to go to investigate. I mean, it's outside, but I still would like to go there and just feel the vibes and if I could actually get anything. And it's in southwestern North Dakota and southeastern Montana. The Battle of the Little Bighorn.
Okay.
Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't actually, but I've heard stories from them for sure.
I've heard that if you go there and just do your recorder, you can hear chants and the drums and stuff like that from the Indians.
Oh yeah, I bet. And I mean, a lot of the places around there are so associated with the key figures from that battle. Of course, it was General Custer, right?
Right. Custer
Yes.
got killed there.
Yeah. So I mean, you get up in that area too, like Custer and a few of the other people that were sort of his big dogs that worked with him were big landowners in that whole area. So a lot of even the haunted hotels and old, like stagecoach stations and saloons and things like that up there in that area are usually associated with those guys. And they have their own kind of ghost stories about Custer and his fellows.
Wow. Now, Barbara, I don't know if you've done any investigations in San Francisco, but have you ever heard of people getting a lot of stuff from around the 1906 area when they had the big earthquake there?
None that I'm aware of. I mean, there's a few spots from the hotels. Remember, this was a big Shanghai port, so
right.
There's a lot of tunnels going through there that supposedly, but you can't get at them anymore because the ground is so unstable.
Right.
So,
well, I would just wonder from the destruction and all from the earthquake, because it was fires and buildings and everything just got tore down. So I didn't know if people would be able to pick up. Well, probably not, due to the fact that this city is always noisy now, with traffic and all that stuff. I doubt if you could pick anything up even at nighttime there.
You can pick things up, just not EVPs. Let me put it that way.
No telling.
It sounds like Memphis at night.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I bet Memphis too, yeah.
Wow. So I know that there's a lot of places around that I would have liked to have been able to go to investigate, but I'm not traveling anymore now, very little. Usually we'll go to Gettysburg once a year, and everybody comes there and gets up with me, and we have a good time. But I haven't been the last 2 years. I'm not going this year. A lot of it is due to COVID, and it's trying to make a big comeback. So how much has the COVID affected I would say the paranormal in general.
I doubt that it's affected the ghosts a whole lot, but it's
No.
definitely affected, hotel travel and tourism for sure. I mean, and it's, the last year I kind of looked at it as like, this is an opportunity for me to sit down and write this book, Passport to Paranormal, and, do this update that Llewellyn's been wanting for the last, year or so. And I just kind of, took it as that. But now that we're heading into the pandemic part 2, it's getting very frustrating to not be able to travel. And this has really been more evident on my end from, of course, the guys from Fuji TV can't really come into the country. And Japan has had its own problems with the pandemic. Right. They don't have the access to the vaccine that we have, and they've really struggled with getting everyone vaccinated and dealing with quarantines and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know that it's affecting ghosts, but it's definitely affecting paranormal tourism.
Wow. So how many places or locations have you got to go to or done out in the Southwest and West?
Quite a bit. I mean, when you get into looking at some of the locations that I put into this newest book, I mean, like I say, I've been to about 90% or so of all these. And so, some of these were trips with Fuji TV, and some were for previous books, and some are just me. I'm just a traveler. If I can just, Memphis is a great spot right in the center of the country.
Right.
So, yeah, it's really great for just, being able to get out and travel around. And of course, the coast being the farthest away. But some of my favorite spots have been out west, especially you get into in Nevada. We went up to the Mitzpah Hotel, and we did stuff it's right up there by Area 51 too. It was really cool because it's in Tonopah, Nevada. And so when we drove up there from Las Vegas, we basically got to pass right through Area 51 and got to do a little bit of sightseeing there and go to the little alien and the infamous mailbox and all that. And then went up to Tonopah, and they have this great circa late 1800s hotel called the Mitzpah that just is really cool because you can it still looks like a 1800s saloon.
Wow.
Except with slot machines.
Slot machines.
I mean, it's still Nevada, right?
Right. It's still got bandits, right? The one-armed kind.
Exactly. So, I mean, some of my favorite spots are out there. We also went to Arizona, and I love the Hotel Monte Vista. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this place.
Where's it at? In Arizona.
It's in the hippie town in Arizona. Usually I can just name it off the top of my head.
Sedona? Sedonia?
Which one?
Sedonia?
No, but it's in that area.
Bisbee? Well, you got Sedona, you got Flagstaff, you got Bisbee. Bisbee's
Flagstaff. It's in Flagstaff.
Oh, okay.
That's it. Yes. It's in Flagstaff. And what was cool, I remember because I'm also this huge craft beer nerd. And so it was awesome because when we went there, we're at the Hotel Monte Vista and hearing all the cool stories about this place. And as they're telling us about the stories, I'm looking around, and there's something like 10 craft breweries all in walking distance. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a fun night.
Wow. Interesting. I like the Old West. I like the old cowboys and all that stuff because I was a big cowboy nerd, like Hopalong Cassidy and Tim Holt, all them old cowboys. And so I always wanted to be go out west and be able to ride a horse and stuff. Of course, you can ride horses everywhere, but I mean, going out there, it'd be something else altogether for me.
Now, see, you sound like my old partner, and he had this really strange idea that if we were going to go and visit a lot of those kind of haunted places, that we should kind of head out towards like Nevada, California, you know, I guess kind of following the old gold rush kind of a trail kind of thing.
Right.
But honestly, if you're into that stuff, the best state to go to is Arizona. Because Arizona, you still have, if you look at, for instance, like the Arizona section of my book, almost all my favorite places in Arizona are those Old West places, like Big Nose Kate's Saloon,
Right.
the Birdcage Theater, the Old Copper Queen, the Red Garter Inn, even the old Yuma prison, where they used to throw all the old gunslingers they would capture. All these places are such great haunted hot spots. Like, you mean you could soak up all of the 1800s gunslinger stuff and ghost stuff that you would want in one short trip through Arizona.
Wow. Well, they had a lot of them there. They had Billy the Kid and just a whole bunch of those bandits and stuff like that.
Well, sure they did. And I mean, people forget, though, that Arizona is the center of almost all of what we think of as when that horrible period of in American history when we were actively fighting the Indians so much, the Native Americans.
Right.
So, like, when we were really going after the Comanche and the Apache particularly, who were pretty vicious, strong fighters,
Right.
That was mostly in Arizona and New Mexico. And a lot of times what we think of as sort of like the meaner kind of gunslingers of the day
Right.
would go through Arizona. I mean, you look at Big Nose Kate's, for instance.
Right.
Big Nose Kate, the person that the saloon is named after, she dated Doc Holliday.
Wow.
And that was his main girlfriend, even through like the Tombstone period when he fought with Wyatt Earp and everyone.
Right.
All these people hung out at Big Nose Kate's Saloon and the Birdcage Theater and the Copper Queen and all these places. So, like, I mean, you had to be a pretty mean, kind of a badass, you know, to hang with the fighters down in Arizona back in the day.
Wow. So
Big Nose Kate was too. I mean, didn't she? And there was another saloon keeper down there, and I can't remember her name. But Big Nose Kate and her got into an argument, and I believe one of them knifed the other one.
You're right. You're dead right. Kate was a badass. And, I mean, there was a reason that Doc Holliday was in love with her. And, I mean, and she was a strong business owner at the time. She, being Big Nose Kate's, was probably the biggest saloon in the Southwest at that time. And Wyatt Earp invested in her, you know, in her businesses and stuff. Even when Doc passed away, Wyatt Earp kept up with Big Nose Kate. And, yeah, I mean, I think you just had to kind of be a tough person to live there.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that was just a rough area.
Isn't that where they had the gunfight at the OK Corral, too?
That's right. That was in Arizona. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Wyatt Earp, let's see. Didn't he go on after he was a lawman there and become a sports writer?
He was.
Oh, my goodness. Don't get me lying. I have no idea.
He married a San Francisco socialite, and he's buried in Colma. He converted to Judaism, and he's now buried in the Jewish cemetery in Colma,
Really?
California.
Wow.
Yep.
I didn't know that. Huh. And he lived up into the, 25, 30s?
Yeah, I'd have to look at this. I have to look at his tombstone to find out.
I think so, because I know he was a sports writer, wasn't he? No, that was Bat Masterson that was a sports writer.
Bat Masterson.
Yeah.
But, yeah. No, I think Wyatt Earp retired as a socialite in San Francisco.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Now, you see, when I was growing up, I would hear a lot of these stories because my great-grandfather, who lived to the ripe old age of 107,
Wow.
when I was very little, he was still around, and he was a character because he lost his left arm in an accident when he was 7 years old in 1895.
Wow.
And it was literally, he fell out of a tree and he broke it, and no one knew how to fix it, so they amputated it.
Wow.
So he went his whole life with only one arm, and he would wear these white button-up shirts that he would button up all the way to his neck. And every time that I ever saw him, he would be sitting in a room by himself with a spittoon. He actually had a spittoon and chewed tobacco.
Wow.
And he was a Pinkerton gunslinger up until the 1940s.
Wow.
And there were several articles written about him in the Kansas City Star because he was kind of known as this one-armed gunslinger.
Wow. See, right there's some stories you ought to put in your new book.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, he was a trip. I mean, because when I would visit him, I was a St. Louis city kid. And then I'd go visit this guy, and he's sitting here with his button-up shirt, his handlebar mustache, using a spittoon, and talking about chasing down gunslingers in the early 1900s, you know.
Wow.
What great memories.
Yeah, I know my family came from Manchester area in Kentucky, and there was feuds. I think my family left that area in the early 40s. But my grandpa, the house where my grandma lived, he got killed in a logging accident. He's buried up on the hillside of the home where they lived. I've been there and got to go up and see the cemetery. But the area, you had to be careful because our last name was Foister, and there was other families that didn't like the Foisters, and you could get shot very easily. I mean, even to this day, they still have feuds and stuff in that area. So it's
well. Let me give you a good reason to go back to Kentucky, because it'll bring us back to the ghosts here, and also satisfy your need for the Old West. So in Kentucky, there's this fantastic bed and breakfast that you can stay at called Talbot Tavern. And when you go to Talbot Tavern, it actually dates back to the 1700s.
Wow.
In Kentucky. Oh. It was one of the oldest spots on the old stagecoach trails heading to the Mississippi River from the East Coast.
Wow.
And this place is a trip. Now, during the 1800s, they actually credit the first person who ever saw a ghost in Talbot Tavern as none other than Jesse James.
Really? Wow.
Huh.
And what happened was in the 1800s, Jesse James had become the hot outlaw, and Missouri was after him. So he and his brother Frank ran over to Illinois and then cut down into Kentucky, and then decided they'd lay low at this tavern, Talbot Tavern, for a while. And Jesse James, when he would sleep, he would keep his gun laid across him in case anyone tried to catch him in his sleep.
Wow.
And according to the folks at Talbot Tavern, Jesse James woke up in the middle of the night and there was a strange figure standing at the foot of his bed. So he whipped out the gun and started just immediately shooting it. And the bullets went right through him and into the wall. And he went downstairs and told them about it. And they said, "Yeah, this place is haunted." And he was like, "Okay, then I'll remember that." Stayed there a few more nights.
Man.
But if you stay in the Jesse James room at Talbot Tavern, the holes from his bullets are still in the wall, right there for you to see.
That's neat.
And what town is this in?
Bardstown, Kentucky.
Oh, I know where Bardstown is. Yeah. Wow. That's down
neat.
That's down there close to Louisville. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. I'll have to. What's the name of the inn?
The Talbot Tavern.
Talbot.
Talbott. Talbot Tavern. Yep. And Bardstown has a lot of interesting haunted space. Right next door to it was the local prison. Because, like I say, this was a frontier tavern / roadhouse / post office / everything that would have been pertinent to everyone who was staying in that area. Everything went through the Talbot. And so they built this little prison right next door And it's a B&B now that's also haunted that you can stay in, and you can actually sleep in one of the cells, and it's called Jailer's Inn.
Wow. I don't think I would want to stay there.
Oh, why not? That sounds like fun.
Yeah, right. You go ahead and stay there and let me know what you see. That's interesting. I'll have to remember that one. I know there's a lot of stories of Kentucky like that. We have a guy that comes on the show, and he's a writer and author, and he has all kinds of books with little short stories about tombstones and different things like that, and stories of how some of them died, and just really good little books. And he's due to be on again. I think it's next month sometime. But he's real interesting. But all his stuff is from around Kentucky there, and I thought that was real interesting. So I'll have to let him know about this place. He might want to go over there and write about it.
He probably knows about it.
He might. So,
especially if he likes bourbon. That's also like the big bourbon area.
Yeah, it is, right.
Well, Tennessee, yeah. Kentucky bourbon, yeah. You get Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah, it's down there close to, I guess just not too far from Lexington.
That's right, yeah. It's south of Louisville, southwest of Lexington.
Right, right. So, interesting.
Now, Rich, during your travels, have you found that, are there any particular areas within the United States that you found to have the most paranormal stories come from? I mean, not including battlefields, which of course are notorious for them, but I'm just referring to general areas such as the South or the North or the Northeast or the West Coast.
Well, don't we kind of all generally acknowledge that the entire city of New Orleans is haunted?
I would say so.
Well,
yeah.
I've never been there.
Excuse me. Hairball.
I've definitely seen quite a few cities that seem like they have quite a large plethora of haunted spots, New Orleans being the most obvious. I mean, I don't think you can go to a place in the French Quarter that doesn't have a ghost story, or an interesting tale about it.
Right.
And Savannah, Georgia is right there with it. Savannah, like almost every restaurant, hotel, anything you go to is going to be that way. But I've also seen that in smaller towns that just seem to sort of, whether you want to kind of pull on something like the idea of a portal or even ley lines or something like that it just happens that everything there seems to have some kind of bizarre, strange tales. Eureka Springs, Arkansas, is like that. They just have a lot of haunted places in one city. And when you go to the Crescent Hotel and take their tour, the fella that I was talking about that does tours there, and he was on the show Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and all that stuff, but he often says, you can't walk through Eureka Springs without hearing a ghost story. The whole town seems to be haunted. And whether it does seem like a lot of these towns that are built around like natural springs that are running underneath them, and that combination of certain types of stone and water seems to conduct a lot more paranormal activity. But number one place for me would be New Orleans for sure in America.
Wow. Interesting. So, what have you heard of an area where there's been a lot of big tragedy and stuff being haunted?
A lot of what?
Tragedy,
oh, yes. It seems like, when you get up into like places in Chicago because of the Great Fire back in the day, there seems to be a lot of places that their ghost stories revolve around that one event.
Wow.
And you'll hear that quite a bit when you go up like to the Congress Hotel and a few other the key hot spots up there. You know, they'll talk a lot about the great fires that happened in Chicago back in the day. And it does seem like New Orleans, I mean, and to bring up a newer tragedy, I noticed for this newest book, when I went down and traveled, and I'm really close to Louisiana, so it's an easier trip. But, and some of my favorite haunted places in the country are in New Orleans, so I'm down there quite a bit. But I've started hearing a lot more stories about things that's happened post-Katrina.
Right.
A lot of the places, families who are devastated and lost loved ones, and places that really suffered a lot just since Katrina, they suddenly have these ghost stories. So for sure, I think they seem to be very isolated, you know, sort of events and activities, but for sure areas have, you know, and I would be shocked if San Francisco did not have at least a cluster of older buildings and hotels and things that probably date back to that earthquake. And I ran into that in Anchorage, Alaska, too. The Anchorage Hotel and places around Anchorage remember the old earthquake from Alaska from the 1800s. Right. And a lot of their stories have to do with that. So, yeah.
Wow. So I'm quite sure that there's so many places that you have not been to the biggest part of them.
Oh, well, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to get to every place. I don't know what you guys, I mean, we do the best we can, right? We go to as many haunted places as we can.
Right. Pretty much.
Exactly.
And yeah, I find a lot of private residence people, you know, ask me to go to or something, where I have gotten quite a bit of stuff. Really interesting stuff. But you know, it's just what you pick up. You don't know that much history about, because the people hadn't lived there for very long or whatever, and they don't know any tragedy or history of anything. So when you pick stuff up like that, you just have to assume that it's there from something else.
Well, speaking of ghostly items, is anybody else hearing a little tiny bell?
Yes.
Okay.
I have not been hearing a bell.
I have not listened for it, but I've got the recording, so.
Yeah.
It's just like somebody hitting a small
little tinkle bell.
Metal bell, just like ding.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I've heard it periodically.
I know the one night I was picking up foghorns, and I even asked Barbara, I said, "You guys hear a foghorn out there?" And she says, "No, there's nothing here." But I mean, it was.
We don't have any ships going by.
Nope, nothing. Just foghorn.
Well, I've always had a kind of bizarre relationship with private cases, in that, you know, I always tell people to be, you know, especially people who are starting new paranormal groups, to be sort of leery of doing private cases, just because when you do a haunting at a private home, there's a certain amount of expectation that sort of comes with it, and it's difficult to wade into a private haunting, and, you know, those people are kind of coming to you because they want you kind of to get rid of the ghost. And that becomes kind of a problem, because there really is no great guaranteed method of getting rid of a ghost.
Right.
And I've seen this come up time and time again, you know, where people are genuinely beleaguered with, you know, a haunting, and they call some, you know, local group that's, you know, a bunch of people who just get together to have fun at ghost places and stuff like that.
Right.
And they come in, and they're so caught up in capturing EVPs and trying to get photos, videos and stuff. You know, they're not thinking, you know, this is a real family who's living here who wants actual resolution.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't the Stanley Hotel. You're not going to leave tomorrow and go eat at Waffle House and go, man, that was cool. Okay, let's go home. You know, these people want an actual resolution to this. You know, they came to you for a reason. And, you know, you have to kind of tread lightly in that territory. And, you know, and I used to tell people up front, you know, if it turns out you're really haunted, you know, there's no guaranteed way to get rid of ghosts.
Right.
I mean, I can't make them leave.
No.
You know,
if
the spirits themselves maybe came from a religious background, maybe you can get somebody out here and the act of a blessing maybe coaxes them into going on, kind of a thing. But beyond that, I really don't know a great method for getting rid of ghosts from a private residence. And time again, I have people say, you know, what do you think about private cases? I'm like, you know, I'll be honest with you, I avoid them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I hate to say that, but I do. And my next book that I'm already working on, probably I'm knee deep in, about halfway through, is actually a book about a private case that I've been working with 3 generations of a family in Missouri who've lived in a haunted place.
Wow.
And that has been a hell of a trip working with these people and hearing their story. Wow. And so I just tell new paranormal groups to tread lightly with private cases, because it's not the same thing as, you know, going to the Crescent and having a good night and getting some ghost stuff, and then you head home the next day.
Right.
You're gonna be getting into the lives of a real family who want resolution, and you got to stay there and be there for them. If you're not prepared to do that, then you may want to skip on that private case.
Our time has run right on by. I want you to give out how people can follow you and contact you or whatever, and then stay on till after we're off, and we'll thank you.
Well, here in the next couple of days, my website will be up and fully running. It's Rich Newman US, and you can always find me. I have an author page on Llewellyn and Amazon, and that's pretty much the easiest way to keep up with it.
All right. With that, I want to thank everybody for listening tonight. And real quick, who's our guest next week, Tabby?
Next week, our guest is Jeff Mudgett, author of Bloodstains, the story of notorious serial killer H.H. Holmes, who is also Jeff's great-great-grandfather. See you next week.
All right. With that, anything you guys got before we jump off? As it's 10 o'clock now. So we're going to go ahead and go. I want to thank everybody for listening tonight. And till then, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
Barbara Duncan.
Tabby Cat Cash.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.